It is with excitement that I say that the Board of Trustees was meeting as we were meeting, and they just approved the new name as of 25 minutes ago. So, yeah. So from now on, we're going to be called Neary Department of Construction and Real Estate and Development. So I think that's going to be a good name. So just want to make that announcement. Again, acknowledging our sponsors, we had another VIP level sponsor, which is Great Southern Homes. They have been involved in our program for quite a bit, but I don't think we have anyone from Great Southern Homes. Anyone here from Great Southern Homes? I don't think so. But again, thank you to them for sponsoring the event. Before I get started, I also wanted to acknowledge our base level sponsorships. Again, without any sponsors, we can do it. So really, again, to the next slide. If you look at the bottom, we have base level sponsors. And if you are from these companies, would you please stand up, because we'd like to, applause for you. So Lithco Contracting, if there's anyone, please stand up. Roofing Alliance, representing NRCA, please stand up. Thank you, Bill. Anyone from Carroll Daniel Construction? Thank you again, sir. Sild Sea Island. Thank you. Harper General Contractors. Oh, Brenda, good to see you. You're hiding in the corner. That's why, and I'm like, where? You're good. Thompson Turner Construction. Applause. Thank you. SC Steel. Okay. Robinson Morton. Arco. Holder. GM Cope. Oh. She's like, on the sides. GM Cope Construction. Thank you, sir. And America's Home Place. Perfect. So thank you again for our base level sponsors. We appreciate your support in making this event a success. Before we move on, we have one more VIP level sponsor we'd like to acknowledge. That's, of course, Paul Hogan, he walks the walk and talks the talk, if that's how that phrase goes, if I'm correct. But, Hogan has contributed and had a VIP level sponsorship. Do you have anyone from Hogan Construction? I don't see Paul here, but, there's a whole team there. Thank you. Hey, you want to say, a few words, 10, 15 seconds? More than welcome to.
So I'm Paul Hogan Jr. I like to be myself as a 2.0. So I'm the new and better version, I like to say. But want to again thank everybody for coming. Greatly, they're doing great things here at Clemson. If you're not involved in the XL Yard, would encourage you to get involved in the XL Yard already. They're doing fantastic things out there. We hire a ton of members from Clemson in both our offices in Greenville and Atlanta. Y'all are doing great things, and just happy to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you again, you guys. Okay, so we're gonna, start with our next panel, and I'm very excited because these panels are gonna build upon each other. And I would like to invite our recently appointed undergraduate director of the CSM program, Dr. Jason Lucas, and I'll let him introduce the panelists.
All right, you guys could come on up. All right, so welcome to the second panel. The purpose of this panel is to talk about project execution risk. So we've got representatives from the supply chain, labor, and fabrication, manufacturing. So I'll go through and give you a brief introduction to all the panel members and ask them to provide an overview of some of their biggest challenges that they've seen. So first, we have Larry Holmes down on this end, the business development manager from Graybar, distributor of electrical communication, data networking, and industry products throughout North America. Larry's spent more than 38 years in the distribution and manufacturing industry and has spent the last 4+ years at Graybar. And Larry, I'll give you a second to just a couple minutes to introduce yourself, but from your experience and background, what do you think are the biggest changes that have amplified the risk of a distributor over the last 5 or so years, and how do you try to mitigate some of those major risks?
Well, being in the industry for over 40 years, you kind of think you've seen it all, but the last 4 or 5 years convinced me that I really hadn't. So back in 2020, global supply chain issues caused problems with our manufacturers. We represent multiple manufacturers. We're having problems getting anything from lighting to switchgear, transformers. Due to supply chain issues, it caused problems with anything electronic. Steel still is a problem. Items that would take 6 to 8 weeks were now extended out to a year or more, and even pad mount transformers are 2 to 2.5 years yet today. So I know that some government officials south of the border decided that workstations were too close together for one of our manufacturers. They had to obtain additional manufacturing space to spread the employees out. So, it caused a lot of risk, and we weren't meeting schedules. Owners and general contractors would decide to pre-purchase material to try to get ahead of the schedule, and that introduced a new set of problems. Not necessarily problems, but the owners weren't as sophisticated, that's not the right term, didn't know the product as well as the subcontractors that normally purchase the items. So weren't as familiar with the product and maybe the process of ordering. As a distributor, we didn't necessarily have financial relationships with these customers, so we hadn't had a agreed upon set of terms and conditions. We were presented with contracts in some cases rather than purchase orders, and we would have to go through legal review. That would take time. So to help mitigate some of those risks, we have tried to increase our inventory levels so we weren't reliant on the manufacturers to build and produce the items to ship. We stocked components that contractors could assemble in the field, and we've even gotten UL certification for an assembly plant or assembly facility, and I won't call it a plant, it's a warehouse in Atlanta, that allows us to build a limited range of switchboards. So that keeps us from being reliant on the manufacturer to produce the item. So, as far as improvement, we are starting to see some slight improvement, but it's slow. It'll improve on one product line and get worse on another. So we are trying to do as much as we can out of our own inventory. And as far as a real way to mitigate risk, it may be retirement for me.
All right, thank you, Larry. Next on the panel, we have Shanna Patton, the Human Resource and Employment Relations Manager of Kutsu Staffing. Kutsu, if you're not familiar with them, they help clients fill staffing needs in manufacturing, construction, and skilled trades throughout South Carolina and Georgia. Shanna, similar question, but obviously from the perspective you're more familiar with, which is staffing and labor supply. What has changed over the last 5 years in terms of challenges, and do you have, or what have you seen be successful in helping to mitigate those risks?
So, one of the biggest things, and it's not news to anybody that's in this room, has been post-pandemic that everybody's got a choice now. There's so many different jobs. We see it even as a staffing company. You just don't see the long-term employees anymore. Used to years of service was a big deal, and now we look at resumes and it's just, one job to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that the biggest challenge is, finding those folks that are coming out of schools that want to get in there and learn from the ground up and actually, want to stabilize with the company. But with that, is the pay structure. I mean, for example, I'm trying to find a sales manager and they come in and they want $100,000. I'm not going to pay you $100,000. You're not going to go sell. So you can make that, but we've had to deal with a lot of folks that want to work remote and things like that. And as skilled trades, construction, even recruiters in staffing can't work remote. So I think it's just retention of employees and finding the benefits, you know, and making them realize it's sometimes not just the dollar, it's the benefits, it's the flexibility. And so, you know, to mitigate that, I can only maybe push for some type of apprenticeships, you know, start getting these folks to, or these clients to, you know, bring these folks in younger, and learn from them and actually take the time. Right now, I think you've got a lot of folks that are, you know, they need help so much that they're just taking a warm body. We're not day labor people. We try to find the best candidates, but they're only as good as what they're trained. And it's so easy for them to just walk down the road and get another 50 cents or $1. So that's kind of the biggest challenge is for us.
All right, thank you. And then last but not least is Bradley Robinson of Steel Fab, one of the nation's largest suppliers of fabricated structural steel. So Bradley, similar question, but from the perspective of a major supplier, what's happened over the last 5 years in terms of your major risks and what are some of the changes?
I remember back to, I guess it was May 2021, and I remember there was a week period where I got, I think, 4 calls from friends at GCs, and they all were like, hey, you know, we spent the last 3 months cussing wood and steel, but now we realize this problem's a lot bigger than just wood and steel. And you know, when you go back to that thing of just that explosion in 21, you know, steel and wood were on the front end of it. And now you can see steel and wood have come back down. I mean, especially joists, they're not where they were, but they're better. Joist deliveries are a lot better than where they were. They're almost back. You know, you can get joists in 16 weeks, but we don't have a lot of job sites that can support that. So there's been improvement there. I don't think there's been improvement, you know, maybe the rest of the industry follows it. It'll be interesting to see. But what we've done, I mean, you know, what we had to do, and especially 21, we had 2 or 3 raises for the shop to maintain our employees. I mean, you know, the labor market got tough. And we have, you know, we have some long-term guys, and we've been able to maintain most of our long-term guys. But you know, we had to increase pay, and you can see it. You know, when you look at what our shop rate was on a change order 4 years ago versus today, I mean, it's up a lot. And I think one of the challenges that's created is, you know, materials up, labor's up, everything's up, and you look at a change order from 4 years ago, and that would have been a $20,000 change order. That change order today would be more like anywhere between 40 and 80. And if that's a coordination issue, it was easy to hide a $15,000, $20,000 coordination issue. It's hard to hide a $80,000 coordination issue. It's also harder to take an $80,000 change to an owner. So that sticker shock of the increased price, not just the base price, but the increased cost of changes, I think has been a real surprise to the industry.
Okay. All right, so in some prior conversations that we had, the idea of a schedule was brought up a lot of times, and that was even mentioned earlier today. Specifically with the level of completion and scope of prior trades, which affects the efficiency of the trades and when work can and cannot be done as planned. So I think we all understand that this is a very complex problem, but related to labor issues and constrained resource supply, you know, how can we get back to the flexibility in scheduling while dealing with labor issues and constrained resource supply? So, you know, how can we, you know, mitigate this risk and, you know, not necessarily overpromise what can be done? Where do you see the industry going in terms of, you know, maybe a course correction in this area?
I'll go first.
Me to jump in on that one, or?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, we're going a lot more automated. You look back before 2020, you look in 2019, and you know, we were looking at $5 million robots to put in our shops, and in 2020, like, you were only putting those robots in shops that had tough labor markets. Like, we got a plant in Emporia, Virginia, for instance, and I don't know what it is, but Emporia, Virginia's been one of our toughest labor markets. So 2019, we put a robot in there. Florence is one of our best labor markets. You know, we didn't think we'd be putting a robot in Florence anytime soon. Well, post 2021, I mean, we're putting robots in every shop that we can physically fit a robot in. And I think it's just going to go that way. I think that there's a lot of our industry is going to get more and more automated. I think the field side's a challenge, but you're going to see when you walk in a steel fabrication shop in 10 years, it's going to be incredibly different than it was 5 years ago. And I think that's the biggest change I see coming for that.
You know, I think, communication, somebody mentioned that earlier, but, just communication and being realistic about schedules. And, early on in 2020, this came as quite a surprise because we went from, like I said, items that shipped in 6 to 8 weeks to 52 weeks in a relatively short period of time. So the customer, but the owners and the GCs didn't realize that it was happening or thought that there was still some expectation to be able to expedite. In some cases, that just wasn't possible. So I think the more realistic expectations and as far as, risk management, we do what we can to meet the schedule and to communicate and to try to negotiate, try to align ourselves with the best manufacturers that we can. But we're relying on their performance and their communication of schedules with us, and often there's just not much buffer between the shipment date and the completion schedule, if there is at all.
And really, just from my perspective on it, it's more of, like you said, the robotics and the AI that's coming. It's taken some jobs away, and so, we just hope that we can do what we can to support y'all in finding the right people, because it's going to slow schedules down the more turnover you have.
All right, so 2 out of the 3 of you said it's labor issues, and we know that labor has been a problem for years, longer than 5 years. We have a lot of people retiring out, and not a very large percentage of younger workforce interested in the traditional construction job. And there's also, there's just a difficulty there to attract people to the industry. So what are some of the things that your companies and industry sectors are doing to help reach the younger workers, to help address this issue from, we have it in the field and project management, but for supply chain, for fabrication, what types of initiatives are going on, or where do we see the best benefit to put our efforts?
I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but really, I think that a lot of employers are just going to kind of have to come off the hip with, better, higher pay, benefits, flexibility. I mean, we will usually, do what we need, take it from you all of what you want to pay and what you want to provide. But I think any incentive that can get those people, on the hook and get them in there longer than just, a few weeks or whatever. And that's one of the things that we can help mitigate is helping with training or, making it to where you guys don't have to worry about sitting and interviewing and firing and hiring and all that. So that's really the biggest thing that we see.
I think there's something this industry is really going to have to reckon with within 10 years. And we're seeing it as the shop slows down, as the joystick shop slow down. And you go in and you're like, hey, we got several weeks of working 40 hours instead of 60. And you say, hey, who's looking forward to working 60 hours in November? And nobody raises their hands. And forever and ever, this industry has always answered speed by throwing more hours at it. And this young workforce does not want to work 60 hours. And I think that is probably one of the biggest disconnects from like top to bottom of this industry that we got to reckon with in the coming years. Because as hard as it is to get people, it's much harder to get people when you want them to work 60 hours a week.
All right. I'm going to stop there for a minute from the questions I have and ask the audience if there's any questions that you have for our panelists. There's down the far.
So outside of just more pay, what are other things that you guys might be doing in your companies to attract employees, right? I mean, everybody's chasing the dollar, but in this environment, there's other things like company culture and, you know, other perks. I mean, is it truly all about the dollar, or is there a work environment, things that you guys have implemented to help retain employees?
I mean, I think at Graybar, we need to do a better job of communicating the benefit package that we have, because we aren't the highest paying distributor in town, but we do have a great employee stock ownership program. So every employee is an owner, and I know people that have retired in their mid-50s that their return from their stock every year is much more than their Social Security. So it's hard to get a 21-year-old to look at that benefit when they're 50, but we need to do a better job of communicating that. Got profit sharing, employee stock, and we just got to communicate better, I think.
I'll speak from Kudzu Staffing as far as our internal employees. I've been there 14 years, and we, you know, I don't even know if it's 5 years ago or 6 or 7 years ago, we never saw any internal turnover whatsoever. And in the past few years, it's just been absolutely incredible how we get these folks in and we, you know, get them business cards and we do everything, and then they're just gone within a couple weeks. And, you know, and we'll have some people that'll actually want to talk to me and have an exit interview, and I think it's just taking care of your people that want to actually come to work every day. You know, we have just entered into a 401k plan. We're at the company match a couple years ago. It's raising salaries. Nobody sits down and does the written review, it seems like, anymore. And then if you do get a review, you're expecting a raise. And I don't think it ought to be that way. I think it ought to be based on performance and just taking care of your people and listening to them.
I remember about 10 years ago, I was interviewing a guy that works with us now, and he asked me what our company culture was, and it was his office guy, and I was like, I had trouble answering it. You know, I mean, I never really, you know, our culture is we work hard and we're successful. You know, I mean, but, and you know, I did co-op interviews at Clemson yesterday, and like 2/3 of the kids ask about company culture, and you can bet I know how to answer that question now. And I don't think the culture of our office has changed much. I mean, there's a few things we've embraced better. But I think more than anything, we've been cognizant of, I mean, I think especially this younger generation wants to know what they're walking into. And you got to be able to answer that.
Yes, Evan Sheffer, Juneau Construction. I had a question probably pretty specific for Larry, but sure can apply across the boards. I know in our recent project, now that we're able to pay some premiums for expediting switchgear and a few other pieces of major equipment, but they still don't come with guaranteed delivery dates. And so that's one question, if we see that improving. And do you anticipate that becoming the norm? Like anyone who's been to Atlanta Airport, you have to have TSA pre-check. you're always going to be paying premiums for expedited gear? And finally, are you seeing more construction managers actually directly procure electrical gear in the wake of this crisis, like sometimes mechanical gear that's always been a historically long lead time?
So to answer the first question, yeah, manufacturers are leaving some flex space available for some expedited gear. And my experience is they're hitting about 90% of the expedited jobs, where they're not hitting near that on jobs where they don't have the expediting fee and that committed date. Now, if you're one of the unfortunate that paid the expedite and that 10% that didn't hit your date, it's very painful, and painful for us and them. We try to get the manufacturer to share that risk with us, and sometimes they have changed their terms and conditions to have clauses where we are the ones at risk. And really, we don't have a whole lot of responsibility in that, but that's where we're at. Are we seeing it getting better? I think slightly. And is it going to be the norm moving forward? I don't know. I still don't have that many projects, excuse me, where the GC are owners pre-purchasing, but there are many more than there were 5 years ago.
Thank you. And I, it's self-promoting here. I want to take advantage of this conversation to remind everybody in the room that we are headed down a path at Clemson to try to capitalize on a need in the workforce that would be a win-win for all of us. And I'm going to dedicate the next 3 years of my life to making this become a reality. And that is a hybrid professional pathway through the industry to allow students to not take 4 years off of their life and spend $120,000 to $150,000 at Clemson University, which, by the way, will always be there. There are people that can afford that, but as the Dirty Jobs guy tells us, that's not the only way to go to college. And we're going to promote through the industry, through you guys, a program, a pathway that will allow students to work, go to school part-time, and get their Clemson construction management degree over a period of time. It may take 7 or 8 years, but by the time they've worked for you for 7 or 8 years and have an engineer or a construction management degree from Clemson, at the end of that window, they're going to be loyal and very productive. I personally believe they will be the best product with a bachelor's degree that you can find on the market. So I'm hoping that what we're proposing, and by the way, there's nothing new about this. This is the way I went to college. My parents, I was the youngest of 6. We couldn't afford to send me to Clemson. Just wasn't able. And by the way, I came out of high school, I couldn't have gotten into Clemson, right? So we're reaching out to an audience that doesn't currently go to Clemson. So we're not undermining anything that's going on at Clemson in the traditional path. But what we're trying to do is develop another cohort of students, increase the numbers of students coming out of Clemson, but at the same time, their hands-on education is happening in your company from 18 years old to 25 or 26 years old. It's a beautiful thing. I'm excited about it. I'm going to spend the next 3 to 5 years of my life promoting and doing this, and I expect that as opposed to 300 students, we'll have 500 students in our program when it's all said and done. So again, self-promoting, but I couldn't help but stand up and say it. And I promised Bradley that I wouldn't stand up and say anything, so I apologize.
Any other questions from the audience? I'll throw one in there. So to mitigate the risk over the last couple of years, what have you seen in terms of contracts with contractors, subcontractors to, you know, mitigate the risk or to push the risk on you? Or what do you try to do to make sure it's, you know, shared equally among others? But how has the world of contracts and purchase orders changed?
Well, it is difficult when they have liquidated damages and we are entirely dependent on a manufacturer to perform. You know, as a distributor, you know, we're not building anything, and we're dependent on our manufacturers. So we do try to align ourselves with people that, you know, that give us accurate information and provide good service. But they have failed us on a few projects, and it's been painful. So, you know, I heard somebody talk about liquidated damages and deadlines in their contracts. And to be honest, we do what we can to try not to enter into those contracts right now. Or if we're able to negotiate a date that has enough of a buffer that it's a good risk to take.
Yeah, we've definitely walked away from chasing some jobs just because of language. I mean, it's not as, especially not as bad for us now. Like when COVID first hit, people were wanting you to guarantee that you weren't going to hiccup, and you know, it was just a great unknown. And I think we were fortunate. I think most of the people we were going to contract with at that time were understanding of meeting in the middle. But yeah, we've definitely walked away from chasing some projects because just ridiculous schedule constraints that yeah.
Another comment that was brought up, and Bradley had mentioned you're bringing robots into the plants. With the advent of technology, AI, robots, and the changing of the process to address productivity, I would assume mostly because you have a labor shortage, how has that changed the labor needs and the risk associated with that? Because you went from somebody using their hands and head to now it's automated.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at the robot, I mean, it's a different level of skill managing that robot and maintaining that robot versus a fitter. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of a transition there, but it's not too bad. I mean, especially when you look at how those robots have progressed from a steel standpoint. I mean, like the robots in a nutshell. 5 years ago, you actually had to go feed the pieces to it, each one in order. So it still wasn't that automated. Today, you got like a conveyor belt that is scanning the pieces as it comes down and inventorying the pieces and then grabbing the pieces as it needs. I mean, it's extremely automated. And you know, you got to check it, but you know, it's sitting there telling you when it's putting a base plate on, it's checking the tolerance of the anchor bolt holes in the base plate. And it's telling you, you know, those anchor bolt holes in the base plate are within a 16th, and tolerance is within a half, or what. You know, it's checking that before it puts it together. It can reject a base plate before it even welds a base plate on a column. So it's really come a long way fast.
So we had talked about briefly in an earlier call, very large projects, mega jobs being done. You know, these can be seen as a boom for the local economy, but they also add to the resource constraints in labor and materials that we already have. So can we discuss how you know, what the effects of, you know, very large jobs are on a regional market? You can think of like an extremely large power plant. There's going to be in North Carolina now a need to, you know, refabricate miles of highway, which will take up labor and materials. So when we have those jobs, how can, or they're in your area and affect the bigger picture, how can you make sure that your needs aren't pushed to the wayside? Because the guy who wants to buy all the materials at a premium bulk price is probably going to get it first.
That's a good question, you know, because we are competing for manufacturing capacity with those projects, and the ones you mentioned, like data centers and electric vehicle battery plants, are big consumers of power. So they take a lot of switchgear, and they, I don't know about the EV plants where they're paying a premium, but the Googles and the Facebooks of the world seem to have an unlimited checkbook. So it is hard to compete with.
You know, for us, we have more of the mega jobs we've ever had. We have more jobs spread over 2, 3, 4, 5 plants, just because they're that big. And the biggest thing that happens is when you're sitting there and you got 20 jobs making up the backlog of a shop in a 2-week period, and one job pushes, it's not that detrimental. When you got 2 jobs making up the backlog of that shop for a 4-week period, and one of those jobs pushes 4 weeks at the last minute, man, you're scrambling. And it just, the peaks and valleys it makes of okay, we're barely gonna have enough material in the shop for 40 hours this week, but in 2 weeks, we're gonna have 65 hours in the shop. That's what those mega jobs have done. And then they've kind of been twofold, because what's happened, especially with like the battery plants and such, is those are jobs where from the time you sell them to the time you complete them, our scope probably grows 20 to 30%. And, you know, not everybody's hedging on, you know, you got a field staff that is barely meeting schedule, and then they want it to grow by 30%, and they don't want the end date to push a minute. That's been one of the biggest hurdles of these mega jobs, is they're so schedule critical. They grow, and, you know, for 20 years of my career, you call me and say, hey, you know, Bradley, hey, we need a second director on this job to pick up schedule. And I can make a phone call and make it happen. And the last 4 years, there just hasn't been a guarantee for that. So the mega jobs have made, they just make the balance really, really hard.
Any last questions from the audience about?
Yeah, I've got one. You know, I look at each and every one of you as a certain path in my world. I'm a general contractor. So as I think through the role that a general contractor has typically on a project, typically we're the conductor of the symphony. Let's make that analogy. We're the conductor. So I count on each and every one of you as being the players to come in on time, play for precisely the right amount of time, and then quit and get out. Because if it don't, the symphony doesn't work, does it? You don't pay, nobody wants to pay me. So Larry and Shauna and Bradley, all of you, I have to count on every one of you. Larry, there's nothing worse than an owner buying the switchgear. He's got it on order 10 months before I even get on board, then all of a sudden it's time for him to bring the switchgear, and it's wrong. So my question to you is, how are you vetting when the owner purchases a switchgear or some critical path electrical component that keeps me from putting power into my building to start the elevators, start the power, start the HVAC systems? How are you vetting those orders? Shauna, my question to you is how are we going to attract people to this business, to this industry? There are obviously easier ways out there to make a living. But yet at the same time, it's a good business. It's a fun business. It's a very unique business, and one I've just really enjoyed my entire career. And Bradley, certain for you, if you don't bring that steel, I can't do anything. So, you know, I know there's big orders out there, and I know I'm not the biggest order in your shop and never will be. But at the same time, I count on you to produce when I need it produced. So understand that when I sign you up, I've signed up to the owner under those liquidated damages that I'm trying to enforce on you because they're being enforced on me. But I don't make the switch gear. I'm trying to hire the right people, and I sure don't do steel. So coach me on that.
Well, that was a lot of questions there. But you're right, it is difficult. What we try to do is, look at the bill of material and the specification, and if there's anything we can do to simplify it to something that is easier to build and more reliable dates can be met. It seems that owners and GCs are a little more flexible on relaxing a spec if there's a better expectation of receiving the product on time. So we look at that, look at alternate manufacturers if we have to, and say no if we're not able to do it. We try to do that, but sometimes we're surprised as you are.
So my suggestion for you is just to call me, and I will take care of your staffing needs.
We're going to do our best, to be honest with you up front. But, I think one of the hurdles, especially on the steel delivery, when we're critical path, what happens when that RFI goes out there? What happens when that RFI goes out there and that RFI doesn't get answered in full? And what I feel like I've seen the last 4 years is, man, there's been such a distraction at the GC level. I mean, y'all have had to handle so much from material, labor, owner issues, fill in the blank, COVID, the whole nine. That what I've seen is like, it used to be if there was one major issue, one major RFI issue, I could pick up the phone and call and be like, hey man, I need you to address this. If you don't get this addressed, we're all in trouble. And the last 4 years, I've had a couple jobs that were just, it's like that slow motion train wreck. You can see it coming. I pick up the phone like, man, if you don't get this answered, we're all in trouble. And, a couple of those jobs, they've come to me now that they've completed, and they're like, man, we should have addressed that issue you called about. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge for everybody in this room is like, I tell all our kids as they grow up, as they get older, or our kids, I call them kids because they're my kids' age, but our young people at work, like, the hardest thing for you as you advance is to figure out your priorities. And I think what's happened the last 4 or 5 years is it's become that much harder to figure out your priorities. Because I may call you, Paul, and say, hey, if you don't answer this, you're not going to get steel in time. But the concrete guy's already called you, and you're more concerned about that switch gear that you're not getting in time already. So I may take the back seat when I don't need to take the back seat. And I think it's just been a hard balance act for everybody.
All right, I'm going to finish up with one last point of discussion, and I'm sure if we had real knowledge of this, you probably wouldn't be here and you'd be rich. But we've seen over the 10 years prior to 2020, fairly flat prices, labor demands, needs, and then there was a heck of a lot of volatility over the last 4 years between, say, 2020 and now. Do you believe that some of these are just market corrections, or do you think that we're going to have, some of this volatility moving forward, and how can we better prepare ourselves for the future? So, crystal ball question, next 5-10 years, is it going to ease off and be more like it was between 2010 and 2019, or is this the new normal?
Well, price volatility seems to have settled down a little bit, I think, the last couple of years. 2020 to 2022, it was escalating faster than we could keep up with. So, I don't have that crystal ball, but I think it has stabilized somewhat.
I see that there's going to be a lot more more and more jobs. I'm hoping that with the way that, who knows what's going to happen this year, right? But I'm hoping that with the robotics and AI and things like that, that there's still going to be the need for the hands-on and for companies like mine.
Like I said, we've seen Joyce go full circle on delivery, And you know, like Joyce is easy to pick on, but you look at Joyce pricing was completely flat for 10 years. You know, and there should have been some increase in there, and there just wasn't. And, you know, it was painful when it doubled in a 2-month period and then doubled again 2 months later. And if you look at where Joyce were in 2009 versus where they are today, it's probably the right increase in about a 3% inflation year over year is what you see in a lot of our products. So, but unfortunately with especially commodities and construction, we're never that steady chart. You know, we're just hard ups and downs. And I'm afraid that continue. You know, I think the new norm is probably hard ups and downs. I'd like to see it be like, you know, nice, steady, flat, but history hadn't shown that. I mean, if you go back before COVID, go back 2008, you know, I mean, I was in this business 2008, and 2008 was a boom bust kind of thing before the financial collapse, because I remember watching raw material and structural steel go from 800 a ton in January to 1,600 a ton in August, and back to 800 a ton by December. I mean, the financial collapse was that fast. So, I mean, historically speaking, we are not a nice steady curve. We are flat with stair steps. So if you go by history, it won't be smooth.
We just don't know what that next cycle is going to be. All right, so for some timing and schedule constraints, we're going to finish this up a little bit early and have a little bit longer break. Is there anything we need to announce?